Welcome to Fast Talk Laboratories, your source for the science of endurance performance.
Well, Chris, hard to believe. We are at episode 400.
That's right. Amazing.
Yeah.
We made it.
And kind of a unique episode because it's almost midnight.
For us.
You and I just ate very large pizza, so we're being like college kids here.
That's right.
But that is because we have some absolutely amazing names on this show, and they are located in Europe, Australia,
and Europe.
We're here.
Yes.
So it's big thanks to all of you for joining us for the show. But I think we've got just about every time of day covered.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, guys. It's a real honor to have you guys on the show. Thank you.
Can I talk now? When do we get to
Absolutely.
talk?
Absolutely.
Okay. Oh.
You're
wait,
asking
you wanted to say
permission
something?
to say something? I can't believe it.
Well, you guys.
It's like you've never done this before.
No, good to be here. 400th episode. That's well done. 400 of anything is an accomplishment, I think. Anything legal.
Well, we appreciate that. So this is actually strangely probably going to be the easiest episode ever for Chris and myself. Because
Don't
when
jinx
we have,
us. Don't jinx us.
Yeah, fair enough. When we have three people like you, just top names in the exercise science field, as I said, it's not for Chris and I to be talking. So the format here, we have some questions that we put together. We're going to hit you with the questions, and then we're really just going to let the three of you take the questions and run with it. So I'm going to start with the first question. And Dr. Seiler, I'm going to throw this to you. What have been the biggest developments or changes in endurance exercise science of the last 25 years? And just as importantly, are they good changes?
It starts for me with the development of the internet. And that coincided with my move to Norway. I can still remember 1993. I'm a PhD student, and there's like one computer in the huge University of Texas library where we can get on something called the internet. And I began to pursue it a little bit. And from there, so what has the internet done? It's enabled, if we go straight to the hardcore deal, it's enabled training diaries. It's enabled a tool for a digital process around this idea of recording my workouts. And we've gone from, the wonderful old training diaries, handwritten, to digitization. And then digitization has facilitated a lot of other things. And then what the three ingredients I would say that have really added up to something on top of that layer of internet infrastructure is, number one, wearable technologies, biosensors of different kinds that are able to take whether it's temperature or glucose concentration or heart rate, and generate an electrical signal that then can be properly smoothed and edited and so forth to give us this data, this information. And then what makes that come together is Bluetooth, that was developed by a company called Ericsson in Sweden. It's now, nobody owns it, and it continues to develop as a kind of a personal area network device for connecting all of our devices. And then the final ingredient is something that most of us don't know anything about, but we're using them constantly, is APIs, application program interfaces, which allow information from different data sources, databases, and so forth to be integrated, to be aggregated and time synchronized. So that's the kind of the ecosystem or the cyborg-ish kind of world that our athletes live in. And that's, in answer to your question, is it good? Is it bad? Yeah, it is. Both good and problematic. Like many inventions through the ages, they can be misused and used, and they are. And so, I'll leave it at that to start with. And I would just say almost everything else, all the wonderful nutrition work, all the issues around psychology, a lot of that is enabled that we can be more holistic. We can connect things in part due to that environment that we've created.
It's interesting that you mentioned the internet, because last night I was having a conversation with my partner, and out of the blue, I suddenly said, it's incredible what internet has done for us. I'm updating one of my presentations that I have to give in Barcelona next week. And I remember when you wanted to put together a lecture, and for every single slide, you had to go to the library, you had to pick a figure, photocopy it, and then draw it yourself into PowerPoint. And now, just in a click, you can access the paper, you can copy paste the figure into your PowerPoint presentation, and everything is so much easier thanks to that. I know putting together presentations is not endurance training or endurance sport, but all I can do is agree with what Stephen said. But that said, from my point of view, one of the things that has improved a lot is in terms of individualizing the entire training process. Nowadays we don't worry so much about the group we are working with. We can really focus and target the individual, in part thanks of all the technological advances that Stephen has mentioned, because now we have individualized access to everything that's going on during training, and we can adjust and modify our training program according to the individual data.
Dr. Burke, what are your thoughts?
I had both those thoughts, but if I have to think of something original, I think one of the big changes in nutrition has been not just the personalisation of the way we work, but also the periodisation. We now recognise that there's not the athlete's diet, but there's not the diet that the same athlete eats every day once they've got it right. We now follow the model of training, the understanding that there's different phases to the season, different types of training sessions that athletes do, and that we now arrange nutrition around each of the sessions to hit the goals of that session, and know that that will, change from day to day. And so there's so much more scope for creativity with nutrition, lots of different goals to be met, but also, ways in which the same foods can be reorganised to meet those different goals.
So going back to your point, Dr. Seiler, all this data that we can collect now, I remember we did an episode where we had two gentlemen who spent years seeing how the Ethiopian runners were becoming dominant in the field. And I always remember they talked about the fact that they would run in a group. I mean, these were Olympians. These were top runners. They would have one heart rate monitor, and they wouldn't even wear the strap. They would just use it to keep track of pace and time, and basically hand it to the leader of the group and say, here's your target pace. And that was as sophisticated as they got. Yet they absolutely dominate the running world. So it seems like you can still get to that highest level without a lot of data. So my question is this just creating noise, or are we able to have athletes reach a level with all this data that they couldn't reach before?
Right. No, and of course the answer to your question is it depends. It depends on the athlete. It depends on the environment. It depends on the technology. There are technologies that are just, they don't work in the real world. They work maybe in a very artificial environment, but then when you try to move them out into the field, the signal to noise ratio changes, and you don't know how to interpret the data. And so it all comes down to the fundamental test of, does this new technology add information that helps me make better decisions, helps the coach, helps the athlete make the day-to-day decisions that add up to, over time, better performance, better health, whatever it is that ultimately it puts them closer to the goal of the gold medal or whatever it might be. And a lot of these technologies, I would say, don't stand that test. They don't stand up to that test. They have good intentions, but it doesn't work in that very challenging environment of high performance. Now, I want to say this, At first, I'm doing a project in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia with runners, and we're getting a little bit more technical. So we'll see how that goes. If I ruin them, then you'll know here first it was me that messed it all up. Got them to start measuring heart rate a little bit more. But to say this is that in what we see is that our best endurance athletes actually are quite discriminating on the technologies that they use. They don't have the biggest technology toolbox. It's often the recreational athletes, the weekend warriors, the Steven Seilers that are using way more technology than they should be, and not focusing on the fundamentals.
I don't think the sport you used as an example is speaking for all endurance sports. It's the endurance running is so dominated by the Africans that, in that example there are genetic components. There is the altitude, etc., etc. But in other endurance sports, such as professional cycling or triathlon, if you want. The technology has contributed a lot to the understanding of the entire training process and the understanding of individual athlete adaptation. So I think there are different situations and it's not comparable. The world of endurance running in Eastern Africa is not the same as the world of professional sport in Europe. The technology can be, as Stephen said, used or misused. When I was coaching cyclists and when I was coaching triathletes, I would say, I'm not interested in the power output today, but tomorrow when I said 342 watts, I mean 342 watts. So I don't want an athlete who is completely obsessed about the numbers and about the data, but I think that sometimes we can guide our training very well using the new technologies. So that's a positive aspect of it. The negative aspect obviously would be being over reliant on the technology and then being completely lost and unable to make your own mind and to take a tactical decision during competition unless you have the data in front of you. So that would be a clear example of misusing the technologies, being lost in the numbers and unable to make up your own mind on whether you should attack or you should hold it or you should make a surge.
And I think some of the data that you're receiving are also really spurious. And so, there's a danger to looking at your watch when you wake up to see what your sleep rating is, especially on a day of competition, because you don't want to see you had a disastrous sleep. This is going to be a terrible day when you need to feel confident. And I'm a sort of a disbeliever in the benefits of CGM at the moment. I see far too many people worrying about their glucose spikes and attributing them to sort of, crazy food patterns, which aren't causing the problems that they think, and then just becoming so focused and fixated on that rather than thinking about the bigger picture of what their nutrition is to be providing. So there's times and places, and I think too much information is definitely too much.
Yeah, if I can chime in there, the metrics, even whether you're working in leadership or in industry, or metrics have a tendency to we have good intentions, but then if a scientist is told that, look, your part of your research time is based on the number of publications because that's what we can count. Well, then you end up, it's a gamification. There's always a tendency for metrics to skew our attention away from the original goal into the metric itself. That we start in this case, you start training, or your behavior starts being driven by the metric itself. I've got to get my heart rate variability up, or, my sleep quality was down, I've got to get that better. And you're forgetting that that's not it. This is a part of the process, but that's not what you're training. And we get derailed by these spurious metrics. And And I think Marco Altini has said something really useful. He lives from a product that measures heart rate variability, but he's very open and says, look, most devices like our heart rate watches or whatever, they measure just the one thing. They measure heart rate. Hopefully they do it validly. And then we get all these darn estimates of everything else. You know, my readiness to train, my sleep quality, my form, my fitness, and my VO2 max. And all of them are estimates that have a huge amount of noise associated with them. And by the time you work your way out enough, they are only slightly better than a 10-day weather prognosis. They're just bad. And that's unfortunately the nature of the industry, is that they make more money by iterating software and algorithms than they do by iterating hardware.
Yeah. And this past weekend, I was at a conference and somebody reminded the classic, not everything that can be measured matters, and not everything that matters can be measured. I know we've heard that a million times, but it really applies when it comes to technology used in sports.
Is there a technology that you would love to see happen like that? If you could make it happen, what would that technology be?
I remember that question being asked at the Australian Institute of Sport in, I don't know, it must have been in 2004 or something. And I talked about this movie called The Island with, what's her name? The American actress. No, it's not The Island. It's you can cut this later. You know, it's this movie in which this guy wakes up in the morning, goes to take a pee, and as he is peeing into the BC, there is this screen in front of him saying, "Oh, you haven't been taking your vitamins this morning. You better make sure that you do this and you do that." So everything is being measured automatically as he pees into the toilet. So I think if we could do this, you know, get everything immediately without having to put on any kind of gear and any time of waiting before you get your numbers, it would be fantastic.
So the only thing I'm picturing here, we talked about how people are scared to look at their sleep score. You're going to have people in the morning who absolutely have to go to the bathroom but are scared to pee.
Yeah, because I don't think I want to know the answers to all that stuff.
That's right.
You know, we've been talking about whether the numbers are valid or not, whether there is variability or not. Of course, when you have something like this, it has to be valid numbers that really tell you something that is properly measured, not something that, oh, maybe your vitamin D is not high enough. No, we need precision in the measurements, and we need proper answers to what those measurements are showing and what is required as a result of those measurements.
I think you could think in terms of a pyramid. You know, what do you need to be able to measure at the most fundamental and get it right every darn time? Kind of like vital signs in a hospital. And then you go from there. But if you don't get that right, then the other stuff doesn't matter. And so you have to kind of build the data capture process stone for stone, from the most fundamental to the most esoteric and detailed. And unfortunately, maybe we sometimes again get that turned upside down. We get caught up in the esoterics and we forget the fundamentals.
So before we move on to the second question, Dr. Burke, you mentioned earlier that we've really advanced nutritional periodization. I would also say on the exercise side, the training side, we've also improved periodization. I remember 20 years ago, if an athlete hit their peak on time for a key event, it was as much luck as anything. Now, particularly in the last 10 years, you see athletes that just seem to hit top form again and again and again through the season, right at the right times. Is science driving that, or is that just continued experience from year after year, athletes just experimenting?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that periodization as a model is very much more sophisticated, but it only becomes useful when an athlete can work with it and then tweak it to suit their individual requirements and their experiences. And so, the best scientists are those that, as Iñigo said, work with individuals and listen to the individual and, take feedback from prior experience and then move it into the future and continually tweak. And that's, that's the relationship, I think, between the athlete and the coach and the scientist that makes a really important contribution, because people have to trust each other. And so, the athlete can give feedback, but needs to have that interpretation from the sort of the coach and the scientist aspect, his own perspective, and then trust that, that all those learnings can then be modelled into the next iteration.
If I can add to that, I would say that all the research on tapering and picking that has been done over the past 30 years is finally having an impact in many athletes, because starting with Costill and colleagues and then the work we did with Thierry Busso on the mathematical modeling based on Bannister studies of adaptation has provided some useful information in terms of learning about tapering and picking. And I'm still surprised when I get invitations to speak about tapering and I go somewhere and it's the first time some people hear about it. So they are not even thinking about individualization. They don't even know the basics. Stephen mentioned the pyramid. We already know the basics of the pyramid in terms of picking or tapering to pick for a particular competition. And then you need to add on top of that to the individual athlete. And some people still don't know the basics, which is quite surprising, because we have a background of research that has provided us with those basics.
Periodization has been part of my mindset since I traveled to Moscow in 1986 at age 20, and I was committed to learning the secrets of Russian periodization models. Well, I was disappointed, but it turns out that I think when we talk about periodization, we have to start with that Maslow's hierarchy again and talk about just intelligent variation. As a starting point, that athletes have figured out, well, we can't go out and train hard every day. So that's solved a lot of problems. It's just understanding that there needs to be a rhythm in the training, whether you want to call it 80-20 or polarized or something, that you can't go hard every day. You need to manage the load. And then you layer on top of that more precise periodization, where you're saying, I want to have a specific order of the emphasis of loading. So I guess my lesson often is that get the simple things right first, the rhythm of training, the need for recovery and things like that. And then you can, on top of that, build a platform of the periodization, where you're actually ordering mesocycles in some specific way towards a peak. But I do think if you're going to look at periodization, you have to compare it against the backdrop of just intelligent variation in the load from day to day, not no variation, if that makes sense. That your control baseline cannot be just monotone training. It needs to be a reasonable variation. And athletes have come a long way on these things. And I want to say that we have contributed to that in sports science and the internet, because this information is so much more available, so that young athletes, young teenagers are already able to go in with their coaches and get help and make better decisions. So I think all the things we're talking about, all the way back to the start of the internet and just the access to information is making a difference.